Good morning and good evening to all that are with us via Zoom and YouTube today. I am Tatiana Rosito, a senior fellow of the Brazilian Center for International Relations, CEBRI. And I have the great pleasure to be here today to welcome you to our online event, 21st Strategic Rivalries, redefining multilateralism and cooperation spaces. This is an event we do in partnership with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung under the context of a broader project on multilateralism. I have the great pleasure today of welcoming an outstanding lineup of speakers. We have with us today, starting with our keynote speaker, Professor Kishore Mahbubani. Professor Mabubani is a veteran Singaporean diplomat. He's also the founding dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, where he also taught for many years. He is a prolific author who has launched his 8th book last March called Has China Won? Professor Mabubani is also acknowledged as a global thinker, an incisive and provocative thinker, and also has a special talent for conveying to Western audiences the significance of Asia, of its Asian civilizations, its values, culture, and how they influence our global order, or rather I would say disorder. But let's welcome Professor Mabubani. Our second speaker is Professor David Lee Daokui. Professor Lee is today the director of the Center for Chinese Economy Practice and Thinking at Tsinghua University. Professor Lee also, together with Nobel laureate Eric Maskin, presides over the Society for the Analysis of Government and Economics. Professor Lee is recognized as one of the most influential Chinese economists under the top 10 Chinese economists influencer. He is a frequent speaker to domestic and international audiences. He has also been a member of the Chinese Monetary Policy Committee and also has held many other positions in Chinese government. Thank you for being with us today, Professor Lee. Our third speaker is Ambassador Rubens Ricupero. Ambassador Rubens Ricupero is a Brazilian diplomat, civil servant, author, and professor. He has been for almost 10 years the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in Geneva. Before that, he was also ambassador to the United States, Italy, and the United Nations also in Geneva. And he was also the Minister of Finance of Brazil and the Minister of Environment of Brazil. He has authored many different books and works on international relations, trade, history, and economics. It's a truly remarkable set of speakers we have with us today. So a bit of housekeeping. I will briefly pass the floor to Ambassador Gelson Fonseca, who is a trustee at CEBRI and also the director of the Center for Diplomatic Documentation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs today. After that, I will start moderating our debate. We'll have Professor Mabubani will speak for 15 minutes, and then we'll have two also 10-minute speeches by Professor Lee and Ambassador Ricupero. We'll then start our Q&A, and I will encourage those who are with us in Zoom to send questions by using the Q&A function. And we'll have about 20 minutes for that, and then we'll go to our closing remarks. So welcome everyone, and Ambassador Gelson, it's a pleasure to have you here. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tatiana, for introducing the participants in our webinar. Good morning, Ricupero, and good evening, Kishore and Professor David. I would like also to salute all of you. Ricupero is an old and dear friend. Professor David Li, thank you for participating in our webinar. But I have a special salute to Kishore. I think we met 20 years ago, and he was ambassador to the UN. And since then, as Tatiana has mentioned, he had written 20 books. He gave, I don't, hundreds of interviews, hundreds of talks. But the thing that impressed me much, Kishore, was your TED Talk. You had 2 million viewers. You became a sort of a pop star of the TED Talks. But I think the main concern of Kishore is try to educate the West on how to understand Asia and how to cope with the rise of Asia. It's not an easy task, Kishore, but you have to insist. But I think it's the first time we're talking to a Brazilian audience. So it's a privilege to receive you at CEBRI, and I hope we're going to have in other occasions receive you here. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. Before beginning, I would like to say that this webinar is part of a project on multilateralism developed by CEBRI and supported by Konrad Adenauer Foundation. The project is led by Professor Ana Jaguaribe, who asked me to say a brief word about the project. The starting point is the crisis of global governance, what many call the demise of the liberal order. And indeed, I would say that one of the few consensus today about international order is the recognition of the fact that there is a crisis. The signs are clear. The paralysis of the Security Council, the lack of progress on trade and climate change negotiations, and more recently, the difficulties for arranging a global instrument of cooperation for a global crisis, the pandemics. It's a sign of how deep is the crisis, how dramatic has become the difficulty to arrange mechanisms for international cooperation. The project discusses 2 main questions. What are the causes of the disarray of the multilateral order? I think there is no single cause, but there is a consensus that the geopolitical causes, especially the growing rivalry between the US and China, is playing a decisive role in the process. We could mention other reasons, but I think the loss of legitimacy of multilateral institutions and the unable to cope with the profound changes brought about by globalizations, and combined with the changes in the strategic arena, seems evident. So to describe and analyze the situation, the global crisis is a first step to discuss how to rebuild the functionality of the multilateral system and recover the ideas that is of the system. Peace, development, justice, the promotion of human rights. The second question of the project would be, what are the implications of this weakening of multilateralism for the emerging countries? The project is focusing on 4 areas: trade, sustainable development, digital economy, and conflict solution. It's a very broad agenda. And the project will try to research taking global rules and regulation as an analytical basis and trying to explore the regional perspectives on these issues. Against this backdrop, one important question arises, and it's the main concern of the project. Are the regional instruments, economic and security arrangements, capable of bridging the gaps of the global institutions? We're going to try to link this to what is happening in the region, what the regions can provide for rebuilding, reorienting the multilateral system. From many perspectives, Asian powers are bound to play a larger role in the new world order. So that's a specific question for this panel. Is it possible to think of an Asian vision for the multilateral framework redefinition? We believe with this extraordinary lineup of speakers we have today, we will help us shed light on these questions. So the question is very simple. The multilateral system is in a sort of intensive care unity. Do you have Asian doctors available to try to treat the patient? Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Now I pass the floor to Tatiana, she's going to conduct our webinar. So, salute, Kishore. Good to see you.
Thank you, Ambassador. It's been an amazing introduction. I would like to, with this on top of our heads, I'd like to bring a few data. Asia today has 60% of the world population. The World Economic Forum estimates that in this year, 2020, the GDP of Asia will surpass the GDP of the rest of the world combined. It also estimates that by 2030, Asia will be responsible for 60% of GDP growth, and that it will have 90% of the 2.4 billion people to enter the middle classes by then. So by any means, the redefinition of multilateralism depends also on where Asia goes and will be influenced by Asia. And what about Brazil? Brazil has strong commercial links with Asia. 50% of our exports goes to Asia nowadays, whereas we import, about 30% of our imports come from Asia. Brazil is, since 2009, a member of the BRICS, and together with its partners has founded the New Development Bank in 2015, now presided over by a Brazilian. Brazil has also recently joined. Brazilian Congress has approved the participation of Brazil in the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Other than that, Brazil has also had traditional partners in the region, both advanced economies like Japan and Korea. And also Brazil has been a good partner of Asian developing countries in multiple multilateral fora. So against this backdrop also, we would like to listen today from our speakers to help us navigate this new world. Before passing the floor to Professor Mabubani, I would like to quote Larry Summers and the praise he gave him for his new book. And I quote, We need to know how China thinks and sees itself in the world, whether we see them as our friends, as our adversary, or somewhere in between. There is no better guide for Westerners to the Asian worldview than Kishore Mahbubani. He shares the wealth of his knowledge and experience in this vitally important book. Thank you. Welcome. The floor is yours, Professor Mahbubani.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. I want to thank you for your very generous words of welcome. And I'm so happy to be reconnected with my old friend, Gelson, whom I haven't seen in a very long time. Gelson, I remember the happy times we had working together in the United Nations, and you were a very dear and respected colleague, and so happy to be reconnected to you. And I'm also happy to be reconnected with my old friend, David Lee, and also get to know Minister Rubens Ricupero in this discussion. You've been very generous in giving me 15 minutes. I'll be very strict. I have a clock in front of me. I'll make sure that I don't exceed 15 minutes. But in 15 minutes, to describe a deeply troubled world is a challenge. So the price for brevity is that I got to be very blunt and to some extent provocative. But if you're not provocative, you won't understand the world. And so let me begin by summarizing the 3 key points I'm going to make in 15 minutes. Point 1, United States has lost its way. Point 2, China has found its way. Point 3, what can the remaining 6 billion people do to manage this US-China geopolitical contest that Gelson also referred to? Why has the US lost its way? There are 3 reasons. The first reason is the incredible sense of triumphalism the United States felt when the Cold War ended. And the United States said, hooray, we have won. And there was a tremendous sense of celebration captured in a very famous essay by Francis Fukuyama called The End of History. And so from then on, the United States said, okay, turn on the autopilot mechanism. We have won, we can coast. And as I say in the TED Talk that Gelson referred to, that essay by Francis Fukuyama sadly did a lot of brain damage to both the United States and the West, because it put the United States and the West to sleep at precisely the moment when China, India, and the rest of the world decided to wake up. So you can imagine how shocked the United States is to suddenly realize they went to sleep when Asia was returning. So if Francis Fukuyama had been kind to his fellow citizens in the West, he should have written an essay in 1990 called The Return of History. And that's what we're seeing in the 21st century. Because from the year 1 to the year 1820, for 1800 of the last 2,000 years, the 2 largest economies of the world have always been those of China and India. So the last 200 years where Europe took off and North America took off have been a major historical aberration. All aberrations come to a natural end, and that's what we're seeing today. And Tatiana, you describe it in your statistics, right? The bigger role that Asia is playing in today. In PPP terms, the number 1 economy is China, number 2 is United States, number 3 is India, number 4 Japan. 3 out of the top 4 are already Asian. So it wasn't the end of history. It was the return of history, but no one told the United States that. And the second reason why the United States fell behind and lost its way is that it fell in love with the philosophy of Ronald Reagan, which Gelson and I encountered a lot when we were in New York, where Ronald Reagan said, government is not the solution. Government is the problem. Let's cut down government. Let the markets run. Let there be more freedom. And America will become rich and prosperous. And the tragedy of Reagan's philosophy is that 30 years later, the only major developed country where the average income of the bottom 50% has gone down is the United States of America. And at the other extreme, the top 1% in America have seen their share of national income and wealth explode. And as you know, democracy is supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. But as Joseph Stiglitz said in an article, it's now a government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. And that, by the way, is not a democracy, that is a plutocracy, which is what I stress in my book, Has China Won? And if America doesn't accept the fact that it is a plutocracy, is in trouble. And the third reason why America has lost its way, and this one I'm just going to touch on very briefly, because all of us are now watching a great historical drama in the Trump-Biden contest. You know, President Obama said very optimistically, there are no red states, there are no blue states, there's only the United States of America. But if you watch what's happening in the United States today, the United States of America has become the disunited States of America, and that's an accurate, factual description. And that's why America has lost its way. Now let me turn to part 2 on how China has found its way. Now let me stress, the real expert on this is David Li. He knows far more about China than I do, but he's also very modest. So he will not say the things that I will say, and I will say them because he's going to blush. So I would say there are 3 things that China did to find its way. And by the way, let me emphasize this. I'm neither pro-America or pro-China, neither anti-America nor anti-China. I'm just a friend of America, a friend of China, and I'm trying to give a neutral, objective description of the realities. And in the case of China, China found its way in 3 ways. Firstly, they went from a country that had built the greatest wall in human history. They jumped away from the Great Wall and plunged into the choppy waters of globalization. And I must say this one paragraph in the speech that Xi Jinping gave in Davos in January 2017, which if you haven't read, please read it. Because Xi Jinping said, when we jump into this ocean of globalization, we drank water, we struggled to swim. By the end of the day, after the struggles, we learned how to swim, and we did very well. And that's how China went from becoming a society that in PPP terms had 10% of United States GNP in 1980, and now it's bigger than the United States in PPP terms. Why? They jumped into the choppy waters of globalization. And today, China is the #1 trader in the whole world. Number 2, the second reason why China has found its way is that it's gone from being a feudal society, and China was a feudal society for thousands of years, towards becoming a meritocracy. And what's the difference? In a feudal society, you only tap the talent of the top 5%, 10% maybe, but 90% of the mines are not utilized. But in the last 40 years or longer, China is now utilizing the minds of 1.4 billion people. It's amazing. The amount of brain power that has been unleashed is remarkable. And as a result of that, even if you look at the Chinese Communist Party, the quality of mind of people who've gone to work in the Chinese Communist Party is amazing. So, you know, when the Americans believe that in a contest between a dynamic democracy and a communist party system, of course the democracy will win, they believe. But in reality, as I say in my book, Has China Won? This is a contest between a plutocracy in the United States and a meritocracy in China. And a meritocracy can do better than a plutocracy can do. And the third way in which China has found its way is that it's gone from being a society that used to be very ideological in some ways to becoming very, very pragmatic. And I can tell you the best definition of pragmatism was given by a Chinese leader, Deng Xiaoping, who said it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or a cat is white. If it catches mice, it is a good cat. And I want to say something that I would say if I was giving this speech 100 years ago, in 1920, it was America. United States of America was the most pragmatic country in the world and clearly had found its way in the world. And China was lost in 1920, not sure which route to take. 100 years later, China has become pragmatic and United States has become ideological. And that's why the United States has lost its way. So that's about these two powers. So the last question I'm going to address is, what do the remaining 6 billion people in the world do? Because I haven't discussed the US-China geopolitical contest. It's too big a subject. You have to read my book for that. But I want to give 3 pieces of advice of what the rest of the world can do. And a lot of it's going to build on the word multilateralism that Gelson emphasized. The first thing we have to acknowledge is that the world has changed fundamentally. And to describe how the world has changed fundamentally, I use a very simple boat metaphor. In the past, when you had 7.8 billion people living in 183 separate countries, it was as though they were living in 183 separate boats to make sure captains and crews were in charge of the boat, and you had rules to make sure the boats didn't collide. That was the old world order. Now everything has changed. The 7.8 billion people no longer live in 193 separate boats. They live in 193 separate cabins on the same boat. But the problem with our global boat is that you have captains and crews taking care of the cabins and no one taking care of the global boat as a whole. And that's why we have all these problems. And if you had any doubt that we are on the same boat, COVID-19 has destroyed that doubt, right? It began in China, in Wuhan, and then within 3 months, the whole world got it. So we are on the same boat. And what are we doing? We're not taking care of the boat, which is absurd, absolutely absurd. So this is the time, if you're on the same boat, you should be strengthening the institutions of global governance. So the first thing we have to do is to get all 7.8 billion people, including the Americans and the Chinese, to accept the fact that we are on the same boat. Point number 1. Number 2, and this is a message to the United States and China, and especially United States, because as I say, the average income, the bottom 50% has gone down. If the primary goal of the United States is to improve the well-being of its people, if the primary goal of China is to improve the well-being of its people, they should be working together rather than working against each other. This should be the priority today. And that's what I also recommend in my book, Has China Won? So my last and final point is that if you're really looking for a magic bullet to solve the global problems that we have today, it's fortunately right in front of us. It's the 1945 rules-based order that the United States and the West gifted to the world. This is a Western gift to the world. Sadly, the West has been walking away from its multilateral institutions. We should bring them back to support the United Nations and to support all this family of UN institutions. And I want to emphasize that Brazil has a very special role to play. And I just want to end with two suggestions for Brazil to consider. The first suggestion is that the first speaker, as Gelson knows, at every UN General Assembly is Brazil. So Brazil should become the chief custodian of the UN General Assembly and restore its status as the parliament of the world. And I hope Brazil will provide leadership for that. And the second point is that the Security Council, UN Security Council needs to be reformed. Brazil needs to become a member of the UN Security Council, but the old formulas of reform have not worked, which is why in my book, Great Convergence, I propose a 7-7-7 formula. I don't have time to go into it. It'll take another 1 hour. I'll just mention it only. But as Gelson knows, one reason why Brazil had difficulty getting into the UN Security Council is that the neighbors of Brazil, maybe Argentina, maybe Mexico, say, why not me? Why not me? Right? So in the 7-7-7 formula, you also have 7 semi-permanent seats. So Argentina and Mexico can become semi-permanent members, and they will also win. So, and the reason I say this is that for all the problems that we have in the world, there are pragmatic solutions. And if you can heed the spirit of pragmatism, which is what, at the end of the day, was what America gifted to the world, then we can create a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Mabubani. This has been a truly amazing initial remarks. We'll come to you later. And we do already have some questions. Specifically, maybe you can think about that during this time. One of that is, pragmatism always trumps ideology? Is there a role for ideology in the 21st century? And another one is about, as Ambassador Fonseca had stressed, the Asian, is there an Asian view for this redefinition of multilateralism? With that, I go to our second speaker, Professor Li, Professor David Li. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, and truly it's my honor, it's my pleasure to be invited to this webinar by CEBRI, and also it's tremendous pleasure to be reconnected with Kishore. Kishore, I always joke, I mean openly joke that you are the voice of Asia, okay? I invited you, remember 2 years ago to China? I told you that. And also I told you that I volunteer to be your free speech agent, your free speech agent, at least in China. You're very popular in China, okay? So let me remind you of my commitment. I still keep to that, okay? Wonderful. So Kishore made 3 points. Okay, I can only make 2 points. You outnumber me, okay? Only 2 simple points, and then I'll go to the Q&A, okay? The first point is that there is no Asian vision. There is no Asian vision, okay, Asian view until the US and China are able to sort out their current trouble, their current dispute, okay? My second point is that I am optimistic, okay? Give me 10 years. I think 10 years later, when we have this seminar again, I'm optimistic. I think in 10 years, we should be able to see a normal or better China-US relation. US will be more or less be able to accept China as equal partner in dealing with global issues. So in 10 years, we will have multilateralism coming back to this world. The key word is accept, which is the acronym of my research center, Academic Center for Chinese Economic Practice and Thinking, ACCEPT. Okay, Kishore knows that, okay? So that's my from economic side, I'm pushing for that vision, okay? So let me come back, let me first talk about my first point. Why do I argue that there's no Asian vision right now because of the US-China dispute? Because whole Asia is confused. The whole Asian is confused. As a whole, Asia is confused, right? Because when China and the US are fighting on multiple issues, Asian neighbors and those countries who are neighbor of China in Asia are confused because economically they want to side with China. They want to side with China, okay? And however, politically and in terms of security, on security issues, they are worried. They are worried about what kind of China will be in 10 years. What are the implications for the further beefing up of Chinese military capacity in the region? Will China take over some of the territories or islands from them? Will China become more aggressive dealing with India on the border issues? So there are many issues in the minds of Asian countries. So right now they are confused. They are confused. Korea, Japan, India, they are confused. I don't blame them, okay? I don't blame them. I blame my countrymen because we are not doing a good enough job. We need Chinese versions of Kishores, okay? We need 100 Kishores in Chinese face, explaining to our Asian neighbors why or what kind of China will emerge 10 years, 20 years from now, okay? So that's my first very simple point, okay? Now, all Asia is confused, okay? And one of the reflections, I believe, one of the reflections of this dispute is the recent issue of the China-India border dispute, okay? The border dispute has been there for 5 decades, okay? Actually, ever since the founding of the People's Republic and also the founding of India, because India and China did not have a border. The British colonists defined a border in the absence of Tibet and mainland China at that time, okay? So that issue has always been there. I know this personally because my parents used to work in India as the first diplomats, okay, in the Chinese embassy in India. They went back to China just 1 year before I was born because of the war. I might have been conceived in India. Okay, I have to check the timing. Okay, so I have a personal witness of that. Okay, so dispute has always been there, and for many times the Chinese side wanted to settle the dispute. By the way, the Indian-China border dispute is not the worst. The worst actually was the China-Soviet Union and later on China-Russian border. Longer border and also very complicated because Russia in the Tsar era took land from the Qing dynasty, lots of land, okay? However, the two countries, China and Russia, settled the border, okay? That shows that things can be done. Things can be done, okay? So why India now become very anxious? I think that on the Indian side, there are a sense of paranoia. There's a sense of urgency. They worry about the future. They worry about Chinese military power being even stronger, when times goes by in 10 years, 5 years, so the Indian time might be lost. So they are anxious. So in the past few months, there was a dispute. Actually, about 2 years ago, there was another conflict in the other parts of the Indian-China border. So for me, I would argue that the main I wouldn't say troublemaker, it's too strong word, okay? The initiator of the conflict of the border is on the Indian side. China has no reason to start this fight because China is busy dealing with the US, okay? Common sense, okay? But I use this example to show you that Chinese neighbors, the Asian neighbors are now very anxious because China is rising and China is dealing with the US. They are confused. So until this dispute, the US-China dispute is sorted out, Okay, there's no single Asian version. And Asian countries are divided. They are confused. My second point, okay? My second point is that I am optimistic. Okay, I believe that in the coming 10 years, the two sides, China and the US, will work hard. There will be troubles. There will be maybe even limited regional military conflicts. Okay, I think the Chinese side is now preparing for that worst scenario, military conflicts. It's now preparing for the worst, for a regional and temporary and whatever small scale military conflict against with the US. Okay, so in the coming 10 years, there will be troubles, there will be problems. However, overall, I am optimistic. I do not think there will be a full-blown Cold War. There wouldn't be a full-blown hot war between US and China. Why? Why is that? What's my argument? My argument is very simple. My argument is that it takes two crazy men to have a crazy war, okay? It took two crazy sides to fight a war, okay? And I believe that the Chinese side, as Kishore just argued, Chinese side is still pragmatic. Xi Jinping is overall still very pragmatic, very, very down-to-earth person when it comes to international affairs. It's not going after vanity. It's not going after power worldwide. Is not going after exporting his own ideology. Okay, remember the book written by Xi Jinping in Chinese, if you translate it into English, it's called Xi Jinping on the governance of a country. The English translation is Xi Jinping on Chinese governance. Xi Jinping on Chinese governance. It shows that actually the Chinese leader is quite modest. The Chinese leader is not trying to teach Pakistan or other countries how to govern. So on the Chinese side, my argument is that leaders are very pragmatic. In what sense? Number one, China is bent on solving its domestic issues. Okay, I'm in the middle of a top-level policy advisors meeting, okay? Very top level. We're talking about the next 5-year plan. The next 5-year plan is coming next year, okay? The 14th 5-year plan. So everybody in this meeting, I can tell you, okay, I'm not disclosing any state secret, okay? Everybody, all the top advisors are talking about doing homework first. I call doing homework first because going to parties, okay? Don't go to parties before finish homework. What's the homework? The homework is domestic economic development and social stability, okay? So the other sign of pragmatism, okay, which China will pursue is that China is not seeking to export any ideology, no agenda to export ideology. Think of Pakistan. Pakistan perhaps is the best friend of China, okay, worldwide, arguably, okay. However, Pakistani election is always on its own, okay. China never interferes in Pakistani election. China never taught Pakistan how to govern the country. China never taught Pakistan how to make economic and political policies, okay, and diplomatic policies, okay. And yet there's another reason why China is not going to have a full-blown international war against the US. That's, you have to understand the Chinese mentality. I'm writing a book, okay. Kishore, you provide inspiration for me. Okay, you wrote so many books. I'm working on my first book in English, okay. I've written books in Chinese. I'm not doing enough in English, okay. The first book has been delayed for 5 years, but I am finishing it last chapter, okay. The title of the book is China's Worldview. China's Worldview, okay. So what is one of the three things about Chinese model, okay, is about international affairs, which I argue is respect-centered diplomacy. Chinese diplomacy is not completely going after real interests, okay? Even land. China actually made concession to North Korea on land. China under Mao, okay, made concession to North Korea. China made some concession to Vietnam in order to settle the border, okay? However, China has been going after respect. This is the Confucianism, respect-centered diplomacy. And the problem with President Trump dealing with China is Trump never gives proper respect to the whole country of China. Although Trump knows, as a person, as a developer, Trump knows how to respect President Xi, but Trump does not respect the whole country. Okay, his Secretary of State Pompeo is the worst. Okay, he's always talking about China in negative terms. Okay, so China's actual diplomacy or policy is not going to go after war. Okay, it's not going after work, not worthwhile. Okay, so because of these reasons, then number one, pragmatic policies, not exporting ideology and betting on doing homework, and also knowing Chinese limit capacity. Okay, China knows very well. Okay, China does not have international capacity. And I use the example again, Kishore. Often domestic, often I tell Chinese people, we need top people who can talk to Westerners. We need people like Kishore. No, I use your name. Okay, you're very well respected. You're very popular in China. Okay, we don't have enough. We don't have Kishores in China. Okay, so therefore, Chinese people are betting on doing homework, not looking to going abroad. Okay, teaching people. Okay, telling people. So we're not doing good enough job. Okay, so because of these reasons, I am confident that China will be eventually better and properly understood by the US. The US paranoia about China being a big player taking over the US role, US hegemony, will be dispelled. Okay, give 10 years time. Okay, US policymakers, US American young people will understand that China is a partner that the US can work with. China will not be able to dominate Latin America, will not be able to dominate or replace the USA in the Middle East, okay, or even in Africa, okay? China's policy is respect-centered, and China is very pragmatic, has a pragmatic strategic thinking, okay? So because of the reasons, my final point, okay, as prediction, as implication is that in the coming 10 years, okay, so my advice, following Kishore's style, my advice to countries like Brazil is not try to take sides. Be pragmatic. Be pragmatic. On economic issues, deal with China. On other international issues, deal case by case. Deal the issues case by case. Don't take blanket side. Don't say I support China or I support the US, okay? Be pragmatic, be very matter-of-factly, okay? Don't choose side, okay? That, I think that serves the world's interest best. That serves your country's interest best. That serves US and China's interest best. Give us 10 years, we will sort it out. The world will be better. Okay, let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Li. I think it's a perfect point for us to go to our next speaker. Thank you also for your thoughts and your structured thoughts. We'll get back to you later, and it would be very nice if you could also lead us a little bit through what do you think are the implications of your views of these 10 years for the BRICS groups, and how the BRICS group could contribute to all these changes in the world order. Now, Ambassador Ricupero, please, the floor is yours.
Well, it has been a fascinating experience for me to listen to our distinguished Asian guests. We need more webinars like this one. You know, in Brazil, unfortunately, we suffer from a deficit of knowledge about Asia. And I think this should be the first of many other webinars where we could provide time enough for our Asian guests to explain to us their views. Anyway, I must say very, very sincerely that I learned a great deal, first with Professor Mabubani presentation, with which I fully concur. I have no divergence, no points that I would like to raise. I think he is wise and has shown a lot of good sense in describing the situation. It is true that the US has lost its way and China has, on the contrary, found its way. And it's also true that for the remaining part of the world, we have to work for global solutions. I wish also to highlight the refreshing frankness of a Professor Li exposition. To be frank, I was even a little bit surprised that he would speak with such candidness about the problems of security and the confusion other Asians may feel regarding the future role of China. So it's really refreshing to listen to those views. My intention is only to present a brief Brazilian perspective on those matters. And first of all, I would like to point out that we are not Westerners. We don't feel as Westerners, and Western Europeans or Americans or Canadians don't look at us as Westerners. You know that more than half our population is of African, Amerindian, or mixed race origin. We are an underdeveloped country. Most of our economic and social interests coincide with Asian and African interests, not with the interests of the countries in OECD. So it's very important to keep in mind that Brazil's perspective is not Western in security matters, in economic matters, and in many other areas. Secondly, I would like also to say a little bit about the deep ties that Brazil has been developing with Asia. Only a couple of weeks ago, the chairman of our CEBRI board, Pio Borges, sent us a very suggestive comparison between African markets for Brazilian products and other markets. And on the basis of the official figures for the first semester from January to June, he showed, among other things, that for each $1 US that Brazil exports to the US, we exported $3.4 to China. So you can see the difference. Then he also pointed out that we had sold to Singapore, Professor Mabubani's land, $2 billion, which is double what we sold to France. He pointed out that South Korea alone had absorbed more Brazilian exports than France and Switzerland together. Other impressive highlights were that Malaysia and Thailand purchased from Brazil more than the sum of Germany and Switzerland, that Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, taken individually, had been more important markets for Brazilian products than France or the United Kingdom, also individually considered. Finally, and this is really surprising, Bangladesh accounted for more imports from Brazil than all the 3 Scandinavian nations taken together, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. You know, this is basically because Brazil exports raw cotton to the Bangladesh textile industry. So you see, China, our first trading partner, represents now 34% of Brazilian total exports, much above the second one, which is the European Union, with only 13, 14%. Of the 10 leading Brazilian export products, China represents the first market for 7 among the 10 leading products Brazil exports. So I could go on and on, but I think you got the message. For us, China and Asia are not the problem. They are the best hope of a solution, at least in terms of a foreign trade. Of course, some of those results may have been reinforced by the current pandemics, but overall, the panorama in investment technology is the same. You know, in the last 2 decades, there has been a persistent trend. They reflect the fact that the demographic and economic axis of the world is gradually moving from the North Atlantic towards Asia and the Pacific. For us in Brazil, this historic, secular, long-term tendency is one of the best things that has happened in the history of the last half century. You know, it was right at the time when old markets in Europe and elsewhere were constantly weakening for demographic reasons, for lack of a dynamism. This trend has provided us with an expected and steady additional source of demand in commodities, which is basically what Brazil exports. So even if in the future some of these trends change, we are very confident that rapid urbanization and economic development in Asia will provide Brazil with secure markets for our food exports, because you will always need food. So besides those effects that are concrete, objective, in historic terms, Brazil has enjoyed an extremely positive relationship with some Asian countries. Take, for instance, Japan. You may allow me to a small commercial, because I'm the honorary chairman of a Japan House in São Paulo. So I'm very much in contact with the Japanese community. You know, perhaps, that Brazil is home to the largest Japanese community outside Japan. We have here about 2 million Brazilians that are first, second, or third generation of descendants from Japanese. And we have not less than 200,000 Brazilians who are working in Japan. And a few years ago, they were 400,000. So we have very close relations with Japan, and it was largely thanks to Japan that in the 1970s, Brazil was able to convert the savanna into the most productive area for soybeans, because Japan gave us a very good technical cooperation program from JICA, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency. Of course, Japan was interested, as China is, in developing an alternate source for soybeans. That was the idea, to have a more secure supply of soybeans. So for all those facts, Brazil sees no reason to feel concerned or threatened by the rise of Asia or the rise of China. We have been active partners of India and China in BRICS. We have been very active in BRICS. We don't have any security problems. Being as candid as Professor Li was, I would say Brazil is very far from areas of a possible conflict in East Asia or South Asia. As a country that is not a nuclear nor a conventional power, the only influence Brazil may have, however modest it is, would be in multilateral diplomacy. You know, we have to trust in collective security, in the Charter of the United Nations, in the rule of international law, because we have no choice. We have no means of defending ourselves in a world of conflict among great powers. So I would like just to close my comments saying that I see no conflict whatsoever between China, Asia, and Brazil. And regarding what Professor Mabubani rightly pointed out about the possible role of Brazil, I just want to confess here that unfortunately, Professor Mabubani, Brazil also lost its way. Not only the U.S., Brazil lost its way in the same in a very, very similar situation with a small group of lunatic people, what the Americans call the lunatic fringe, that were able to conquer power because of special circumstances. So right now, unfortunately, our potential for influence, however modest, is not existent until we can go back to what really the majority of sensible people in Brazil believe. So I will rest my case, but just to say that we are confident that the East Asians and the Asians in general, Indians and others, they can bring some values of their culture to the international system. Social discipline, reverence for education, for knowledge, for science, all those things would be welcome in a world where the threats to multilateralism are not coming from China, are not coming from Asia. They are coming from another direction, and we all know what this direction is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ricupero. I'm really, I have to tell you all that I have been receiving many messages and comments about this fascinating panel, and I have taken note also of Ambassador Ricupero initial remarks and also other from our audience that we need to have more panels like that, and we need to discuss more Asia. We have been trying to do that in CEBRI at our Asia program, and including through the China Analysis Group, which I coordinate, but we'll certainly do more of that. Now, I will try. We have been also receiving many questions. I have sorted out a few of them. And if we could go back to starting with Professor Mabubani about this issue of the Asian view, and it combines with also many questions that we have been receiving. For example, there is one about, do you see any possibility of a resurgence of a sort of a non-aligned movement? Or another very interesting comment is that actually this state of flux, but also the difficulties for having an Asia view have to do with the need for regional leadership. And maybe that regional leadership, the only way for this to really happen in a democratic way is through multilateralism. What do you think about that through an authentic multilateral experience? Professor Mabubani, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I know we are running out of time, so I'll be very brief again in my comments, because I know I think David and Ambassador Ricupero will also have other questions to address. Let me just, by the way, you mentioned earlier there's a question about ideology.
Yeah.
And I was going to mention to you that ideology, John Maynard Keynes, I think David Lee knows it better, said that we are all prisoners of some dead man's ideology. And I think what has gone wrong in the United States, by the way, is that the founding fathers of the United States emphasized freedom and equality. What's happened since Ronald Reagan times is that they push freedom up and they push equality down. And if you read, I studied an American philosopher called John Rawls. I'm a great fan of his. John Rawls, if you look at his book, Theory of Justice, said a democracy rests on freedom and equality. And America basically has got to resuscitate the equality pillar of its ideology. So that's why ideology is so important. Now, on the Asian view of multilateralism, I want to emphasize that actually, from my point of view, and I think David also suggested it, the Asians are very happy with the 1945 rules-based order that the West has created. And they're happy for a good reason. The biggest beneficiaries from this 1945 rules-based order are the Asian countries. I mean, why has China's economy grown so fast? Because it joined the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization wasn't created by Asia, wasn't created by China, wasn't created by India. It was created by United States and Western Europe. And basically, we have discovered we like the World Trade Organization. We want to strengthen it. We want to make it even better. So the good news is that we don't have to reinvent the world order. And I think instead of going back to the question about non-aligned movement or regional leadership, frankly, what we should do, and this is what I wrote a whole book about this called The Great Convergence. And we need to resuscitate the existing institutions, either the UN General Assembly, to make it a parliament, we can listen to the voices of everybody. And I think, frankly, it's also will be good for the United States. The founding fathers of the United States said, America must show a decent respect for the humanity or the opinions of mankind. It's one of the founding fathers' statements. That's what, and the best place to show them what opinions of mankind are is through the UN General Assembly. But the other point I make, and I'm going to stop here, is that President Bill Clinton, in a speech in Yale he gave in 2003, gave very valuable advice to his fellow Americans, And he said, if America is going to be number one forever, then America can keep on doing whatever it's doing. Then he added a part, but he said, if America can think of a world where it is no longer number one, then it is in America's interest. This is Bill Clinton speaking, Bill Clinton. It's in America's interest to strengthen multilateral rules, multilateral processes, multilateral norms, multilateral institutions. That's what the United States should be doing. So and Gelson can confirm this, the number one opponent of the UN, the number one country that's been weakening the United Nations has been the United States. So my argument to the United States is that you are shooting yourself in the foot when you weaken multilateralism. So my goal is to persuade Americans that it is in America's national interests to strengthen the UN and strengthen multilateralism. And if you can all get that argument through to the United States, then I think our problem with multilateralism is solved.
Thank you very much, Professor. All the time management issues, it's my fault, but because it has been so fascinating, it's very difficult to stop. If you have 10 or 15 minutes more, we can continue until like 9:30 there and 10:30 in Brazil. So, and then we have after that one more question. I'll go now to Professor Li. So we had posed before a few issues on the BRICS, but also feel free to comment on other issues that from the previous speakers' presentations. One issue that you might want to touch upon is also, what if you were very optimistic with this 10-year window? What if when China becomes the #1, how would that change? And also the role for Rmb internationalization. Thank you.
Yes, let me first respond to Kishore's point, which I fully agree. But let me put in a Chinese perspective, give you a Chinese story, Chinese perception of this issue. The Chinese perception of the U.S. problem right now, okay, is that the USA, with due respect to our aged guests, okay, is a grumpy grandpa. You know, grandfathers sometimes become grumpy, you know, complaining things, okay? Grumpy, this is perhaps American slang, okay? Grumpy grandpa, okay? That is an old person who built the building and in which the young kids are comfortable, but the young kids are growing up. The young kids are not looking to demolish the building. Rather, the young kids would just want to redecorate some buildings, some rooms. Okay, China is a growing young kid, becoming very big, just trying to decorate some of the rooms, not want to demolish the whole building. USA is the builder of the building. And the USA is now becoming aged, right? Becoming grumpy, okay, and becoming paranoid. So in China, how we refer to the USA, we call the old American. Okay, by old, we mean somebody who is very bossy, somebody who is very confident, somebody who is very persistent on his views, okay? So this expression of the Chinese about the USA, the old America, actually shows you the mentality, what Chinese perceive the US. That is, Chinese believe that we have to, frankly speaking, oftentimes massage the US psychology, the US egoism, okay? So this is the pragmatism. You talk about pragmatism. This is the Chinese dominant view, okay, among Chinese intellectuals, Chinese policymakers, that is, US is tired and the US is complaining, and we need to massage the US ego, okay? However, President Trump went too far. When the US gets a new president, we can work better with a new president. Okay, that's my view, my Chinese perspective, going, you know, supplementing Kishore's point. Okay, on the issue of the BRICS. Okay, now I believe that the BRICS countries will actually readjust, will do better. Okay, the BRICS until now have been a body working on the economies. Okay, like the NDB. The NDB was founded 5 years ago by the BRIC countries, okay? But from now on, I think BRICS countries will come together more as a forum to talk about common issues, okay? Although there are differences between China and India, although there are issues of Pakistan or the Belt and Road, okay? India has concerns of BRI, okay, Belt and Road Initiative, okay? Still, the BRICS countries have many things coming together. The BRICS countries are beneficiaries of global free trade. So from now on, I believe BRICS will be more about ideas, about forum, about occasions or events, having discussions, rather than just pure lending. And I'm very happy that the NDB has now a super powerful, super capable new president from Brazil. His name is Marcos Troikos, right? He's a wonderful person, and I met him about 2 weeks ago.
We lost Professor Li.
Leadership promoting their views. Okay, so I believe that NDB, under the leadership of the new Brazilian president, will become more active in pushing for views of BRICS. So I am optimistic about the BRICS. The BRICS will be more important, not necessarily in economics and finance, however, more on views, especially on providing a voice, supporting multilateralism. going against any potential attacks on the current global governance. Okay, on RMB internationalization, very quickly, I don't believe this is top priority. It is not a top priority of the Chinese government, because in order for the RMB to be international, many things have to be there, and the Chinese economy and the financial system are not there. Okay, it will take many years before China to be able to have an international currency. So current policy is very pragmatic, is to maintain financial stability, maintain trade stability, find alternative partners in international trade when the US is retreating from the global trading system. So, but not RMB. China is not in a hurry to replace the US dollar because China is a big beneficiary of the US dollar-centered financial system in the world right now.
Thank you, Professor Li. Ambassador Ricupero, if you could also comment not only what you would wish to the previous speaker's speech, but also we have taken note of your views in terms of short-term priorities for Brazilian foreign policy and the attitude in multilateral fora. But what in the medium to long term? Do you think that this, how do you view this possibility advanced by Professor Mabubani in terms of using UNGA, for example, to reform and go to the spirit of the founding members? And also, could possibly a Biden president be a fresh start also for this and for Brazil?
Well, you know, I found his ideas quite encouraging. Unfortunately, we lack now the right international atmosphere. You know, the last time we had an opportunity to really reform the Security Council was back in 2005 when Kofi Annan was the Secretary General, and we had this global meeting, and we tried to reform many areas in the UN. You remember that was the time when the Human Rights Commission was changed into a council, but finally the results were quite modest. We, at the time, we were unfortunate because the US government, it was George W. Bush, had sent as their representative to the UN this truculent ambassador who later became the advisor in international security of Trump. And just now he has published his books of revelations about Trump. And he was very effective in torpedoing and sabotaging the reform at the time. So I see no realistic prospect in not only in the short term, but perhaps even in the middle term, to have a convergence of views that would make possible to reform the UN. Of course, I hope that in the future, when that moment comes, and probably Professor Li is right, perhaps in 10 years' time, it could be a ripe time for that. I hope that when it comes, Brazil will be able to play its role, its constructive role of trying to be a force of moderation, of pragmatism, of building consensus. Right now, unfortunately, I don't think we could have that, neither in the US nor in Brazil, two countries that, using Professor Mabubani's words, have sorely lost their ways.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ricupero. I will now proceed to our last questions, and this will also be the final comments of our speakers. Professor Mabubani, I think one issue that is very important and key to the evolution of China and actually of the world at large is the succession issue, and you've pointed out this in your book. You've also dealt with the increasing authoritarian space or the shrinking civil space there. Could you also, in your final remarks, please address those issues? Thank you.
Sorry, which succession issue are you talking about?
The succession in China, and succession of leadership.
Oh,
that
okay.
You've mentioned in your book how this is important and it's a key issue for success.
Yeah, well, I think, every country faces challenges, okay? United States is now, as you know, the United States is still by far the most successful society we've had since human history began. The reach and power of the United States is absolutely amazing. We must never, in fact, in my book, as you know, have a fictional memo to President Xi Jinping saying, we have taken on a great struggle with the United States, but we must never, never underestimate the United States. It's an amazing country. We should always bear that in mind. Now, in the case of China, as a friend of China, I've said that the biggest challenge that China faces is that in the long run, for China to succeed, it's got to keep on producing strong and able leaders, because the Chinese system relies on having strong and able leaders. And in fact, as in a system like China, unlike a system like United States, in fact, United States for a long time, they said that you can have a dummy as a president and United States could still do very well. But Trump has proven that's not true. So even the United States needs, I think, a competent leader. But certainly in the case of China, I do discuss in my book very openly. And I say that this is the issue that China should pay attention to. And as you know, in my book, it's an effort to help both United States and China understand what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are and how they have to deal with it. But my final conclusion is that the rest of the world would actually be better off to see a strong United States, a strong China, but a strong United States and China working with the rest of the world rather than working against the rest of the world.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mabubani, for your words. Professor Lee, we do have a few questions. Maybe it would be a good time for you to enlighten us on some of the issues, current, very much discussed issues in Chinese economy, such as the dual circulation theory, and also maybe a word on how it relates to BRI and what could you expect from BRI from here on. Thank you.
Wonderful. The so-called dual circulation theory refers to the following idea that in the coming 5 years, maybe 10 years, okay, the world economy will be slow. Okay, so China will no longer be counting on the foreign markets for its economic growth. So instead, domestic circulation, domestic economic activities or circulation, production, investment, consumption, so on and so forth. Domestic circulation. Meanwhile, the international circulation, meaning that export, import, foreign direct investment, and the outgoing investment will still be important in order for the Chinese economy to be competitive. Okay, especially in science, technology. So China, while relying mainly on domestic market for economic growth, for the quantity, the quality of growth, the competitiveness of the firms, of the companies in China, this is called dual circulation theory, okay? I think this is super clear, right? Quantity-wise, domestic market is important. Quality-wise, international trade is important for the future economic growth, okay? Now, let me quickly add two points that Kishore mentioned before. One is succession, okay? The Tatiana was asking about after Xi Jinping, who will succeed? Who will become the new leader? Will there be a chaos like the Cultural Revolution. Okay, the Cultural Revolution by Mao was motivated by the issue of succession. Okay, now my view is that today the Chinese Communist Party has already institutionalized a system to choose leaders. In order to be the future leader of China, you have to be the party secretary in two major the standing committee for 5 years. So there are certain rules which is more rigid than the U.S. politics. Okay, so with this, and these rules were not there in the Mao era. Today they are with such rules. So I'm not too concerned about the issue of succession. Okay, not too concerned because there are clear rules there. Kishore mentioned meritocracy. Meritocracy is a system. Okay. The other very quick point that Kishore mentioned with the USA is the following. Now, I strongly believe US is a great country. Okay. System, as you know. Okay. However, I think Maynard Keynes mentioned before that US always choose the make the right decision after exploring all the possible failures. So today, frankly speaking, as a Chinese, I think the choice of President Trump is an exploration of alternatives. And they run this mistake. They will pass by this mistake, and then they will choose a good leader down the road. Okay, that will properly solve the US problem. So overall, I'm also optimistic about having a strong USA in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Li. Ambassador Ricupero, would love to hear you for your final remarks.
Well, you know, I just wish we could have more events like this one. And perhaps in the future, we could have one where we could dwell more on Asian values. That is, how could Asia contribute to the future of multilateralism with their values of the central importance of education, the reverence for science, the pragmatism in development, the high sense of a social discipline. I think in Brazil, we need to learn more and to try even to imitate some of those qualities that we miss very much. This is why we lost our way in our development process. Things like former Prime Minister Lee of Singapore, in his wonderful book about the development of Singapore. So we need to learn more about those things. And if you allow me, I would like to ask Professor Mabubani about a dear person to me, Ambassador Tommy Cole, how he's doing, because, you know, he was my boss at the UN Preparatory Committee for the conference in Rio in 1992, the famous environmental conference. He was a very tough boss, but certainly the best diplomat I've ever met. How he's doing?
Very, very quickly, I saw him and his wife today, exactly 10 hours ago. They're both doing very well. I'll pass on your regards to them.
Yes, please tell him that I cherish the memories of that time. You know, sometime he was very tough and reprimanded me because I was the coordinator for the finance committee where things were quite difficult. But I have no doubt that in all my career, he was the very best in terms of combining toughness, effectiveness, and the courtesy of manners.
Thank you. Thank you. On that note, I'm very happy today. Actually, I have received our president, the chairman of CEBRI, Giuseppe Borges, was also accompanying this debate. And I think I could say already to Ambassador Ricupero and also to our Asian friends that this is one of the best debates we have had ever or recently. And we could consider this just the first of many, okay, of a series of debates on Asia. So with that, thank you very much. And I will pass also, thank you very much for our speakers and for the audience that has been with us. Unfortunately, we couldn't answer all the questions, but this is one more reason for us to continue. And thank you also, Professor Ana Jaguaribe, for the inspiration and for the project in multilateralism. I will pass the word to Ambassador Gelson Fonseca for just a goodbye. Thank you.
Just thank you for the participants. It was a pleasure to see Kishore again. Congratulations for your work. And just notice that CEBRI maintains a permanent research on China, and Tatiana is one of the leading persons in this research. So we need more information of Asia, and I think CEBRI is playing a good role in this process. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Li. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And I hope we'll repeat the seminar with the same objectives, the same goals. It was a splendid meeting. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good evening. Bye-bye. And good.